Okay, today we're going to be working with equivalents of tenths and hundredths using the area model and some number disks. So we're going to start off here with number 1. Okay, we've done practice with equivalent fractions, so this should be some good review. We're going to find the equivalent fraction using multiplication or division. And then we're going to shade the area models to show the equivalency. And then we're going to record it as a decimal. So looking at letter A, okay, notice that we have two separate area models. One's been divided up into tenths, and one's been divided up into hundredths. So you can see from our first problem here, we're starting off with 3 tenths, and then turning it into hundredths. Okay, so looking at our first area model, we're going to shade in 3 tenths. Okay, and then there's our 3 tenths. Now, notice how each tenth has then been divided up into 10 sections, making hundredths. So what we're going to be doing here is we're going to be multiplying our numerator and our denominator by 10. Okay, so remember we're multiplying by 10 tenths, which equals 1, so we're not changing the value. And we're just changing the size and number of the piece sections. So we know that 3 times 10 is 30, and 10 times 10 is 100. So our 3 tenths then becomes 30 hundredths. And now we can come over here and shade in the same amount. And you can see that we still have our 3 columns, and each column has been divided up into 10 sections. So our 3 tenths has now become 30 hundredths. Okay, and now to convert this into a decimal, remember we're going to 30 hundredths, which is going to look like that. Okay, so we've just gone from 3 tenths to 30 hundredths. So putting that 0 in the hundredths place is not going to change the value. Okay, and think about covering up that 0. There's our 3 tenths, what we started with. Putting the 0 after that 3 tenths doesn't change the value. Okay, now moving on to the next one, we're going to go in the reverse order. We're going to start with our hundredths and then convert it into tenths. Okay, so you can see we're going to start off with 50 hundredths. So we're going to come over here and we're going to shade in 50 of those. Okay, and there's our 50 hundredths. Okay, now what we're going to do is we're going to take each of those hundredths and we're going to convert them into tenths. Okay, so because we're making fewer sections, we're going to divide. So we're going to divide by 10 tenths. So 100 divided by 10 is 10, 50 divided by 10 is 5. Okay, so now we're going to shade in 5 tenths. And you can see that it looks like that. Okay, and now showing what it looks like as a decimal, remember that our 5 tenths has a 5 in the tenth place. And because you know fraction equivalency, you also know that 5 tenths is also equal to 1/2. Okay, so moving on now to number 2. We're going to complete the number sentences and shade the equivalent amount on the area model, drawing horizontal lines to make hundredths. Okay, so we're going to start off with 37 hundredths. So we have tenths, so what we need to do is create 10 rows to create our hundredths. Okay, you just do your best to have them about the same size. So now what we're going to do is we're going to shade in 37 of them. Okay, so here's 10, there's 20, here's 30 hundredths, and then we shade in 7 more, which would look like that. Okay, so now we can take our 37 hundredths and we can see that we have 3 full columns shaded in. So that's 3 tenths. Okay, then this partially filled column, we have 7 hundredths shaded in. Okay, So written as a fraction form, we have 37 hundredths, and then as a decimal, 37 hundredths. You can see your 3/10, 7 hundredths. Okay, moving on to the next one. Again, we're going to create our 10 rows. Okay, and we're going to be shading in 75 hundredths. Okay, so that means I have 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, and there's 70. So there's our 70 hundredths. Okay, now I have 5 more hundredths after that. So there's our 75 hundredths. So I can see that I have 7 full columns. So I have 7 tenths, and then 5 hundredths in my partially filled column. So as fraction form, we have 75 hundredths, and as a decimal, we have 75 hundredths. And connecting that to money, you know that 75 hundredths is 3/4. So 75 hundredths is also equivalent to 3/4. Okay, moving on to number 3 here. We're going to circle hundredths to compose as many tenths as we can. We're going to complete the number sentences and represent each with a number bond as shown. So you can see the first one's been started for us a little bit. So we're going to make a group of 10 hundredths. Okay, and so we can see that we have a total of 12 hundredths. Now my one group of 10 hundredths becomes 1/10, and then I have 2 more hundredths after that. So you can see that it would be 12 hundredths as a decimal, and then broken up into your number bond, you have your 1/10 and your 2 hundredths. Okay, so now let's do one more. Okay, so again, we're going to make groups of 10. Okay, and you can see up here that we have 2 groups of 10, so we have 27 total hundredths. So we've made 2 groups of 10 hundredths, which becomes 2 tenths, and then we have 7 more hundredths after that. So written as a decimal, we know that that's 27 hundredths. And then using our number bond, we can show that we have 2 tenths, which is our 2 over here that we've circled, and then we have 7 hundredths more after that. Okay. All right, moving on to step 4. We're going to use both tenths and hundredths number discs to represent each number. Write the equivalent number in decimal, fraction, and unit form. So we're going to show it 3 different ways so we can really understand what it is the fraction is showing. Okay, so now our first one, notice how we have 3 hundredths. Now be very careful that you're putting the 3 in the correct spot. Remember, this is 3 hundredths, not 3 tenths. So written as unit form, it would look like 3 hundredths. Now using our number discs, you can see that it would look like that, because that's your 3 hundredths. And then written as your decimal form, it would look like that. Okay, so moving on to letter B, we have 15 hundredths. So you know that that is 1/10, 5 hundredths. So when we go to use our number disc, we have 1/10, and then we have 5 hundredths. Remember, be very careful about placing that 0. Your 0 should be in the tenths place when we're looking at the hundredths place. So there's your 15 hundredths, and then written as a decimal looks like that. Okay, moving on to part C. Notice we're going in the reverse order. So now we have 72 hundredths. Remember, that's how you would read that. So I know that I have 72 as my numerator and 100 as my denominator. Okay, now notice how this one is just written as hundredths, so I have 72 hundredths. tenths. Okay. Now, when we come down to do our number discs, okay, you know that we have 7 in the tenths place, so we're going to make 7 tenths. Okay, and I like to kind of keep mine in groups of 5, a little bit easier to see. And then we have 2 hundredths written like that. Okay. Now this next one, look very carefully. Notice how it looks like 80 hundredths. But then our unit form has tenths. Okay, so remember that 0 in the hundredths place doesn't change the value. 80 hundredths is actually equivalent to just 8 tenths. So we have 8 tenths here. So rather than drawing 80 hundredths, we can just draw 8 tenths. And there's our 8 tenths. And we have 0 hundredths left over. Okay. Moving on to our last two. If you notice E, now we have the unit form. So I have 7 tenths, so I'm going to put a 7 in my tenths place, and a 2 in my hundredths place. Okay. Then, converting that over to your fraction form, you see that this is also 72 hundredths. Now right away, you should see a connection to the one we did up here in letter C. But notice the slight difference. Here we have 72 hundredths. Here we have 7 tenths and 2 hundredths. So 2 different ways to read the same decimal. Okay? So then our number discs will look the same. So I have our 7 tenths and our 2 hundredths. Okay? So again, the fraction, the decimal, and the number discs will look the same, but our unit form can be written 2 different ways. Finally, letter F is 80 hundredths. So we come up here and we can write 80 hundredths. Now again, letter F connects to the one that we did here with letter D. Again, notice the difference. We're doing 80 hundredths and 8 tenths. But the decimal is written the same. Okay. Now because we're dealing with 80 hundredths, when we go to write it as a fraction, I'm going to be writing 80 hundredths. So notice the decimal looks the same because 8 tenths is equivalent to 80 hundredths. Okay. So now again, we can just write our 8 tenths underneath, rather than having to do 80 of our hundredths. Okay, so again, just like the last one, notice how our number discs are the same, our decimal is the same, but we can read that same number 2 different ways. It can be read as 8 tenths or 80 hundredths. And you can see by the number discs that the value does not change. Okay? So, this completes the problem set. Now go ahead and give a try to the exit ticket.